Shalom and welcome to part 2 of a little 3-part series on the Hebrew of Psalm 23 in Hebrew. So just before we begin, at part 1 we looked at verse 1 and 2. Part 2 we're going to look at verse 3 and 4. Pardon me. Just before we begin, a little introductory thought. And it's this: why read the Hebrew? Well, even people who have studied Hebrew often don't actually read the Bible in Hebrew, but they pluck the Hebrew words out of the context and then look them up in big dictionaries and get all kinds of meanings. But this does lead to them treating the Hebrew in an artificial way, often an exaggerated way, and it can lead to a whole slew of distorted and sometimes downright wrong ideas. You can use grammar reference sheets and computer helps to check what the grammatical form of the word is and what its first approximation meaning is, but then you need to put all these things aside and just read the plain text again. This is how language is meant to be used, not cherry-picking words and plucking them out of context and using big dictionaries. You could use an analogy. It's pulling a word out of its context and looking at it in isolation is a bit like pulling a tiger out of the jungle and putting him in a little cage and studying him in isolation. Of course, he'd be a very different creature in your cage to what he was in his natural environment in the jungle. Okay, so now it's time. Let's get back straight into the Hebrew, verses 3 and 4, Psalm 23. Nafshi Yeshovev. So this little bit here means my, and that little bit there means he. So here we have the word for soul. Well, we could say first approximation is soul, but in many ways it's quite different to our English word soul. In my Hebrew lesson 13 on Psalm 146 verse 1, I talked a bit about this. We use soul, my soul, to mean my bodiless self, or the real me contained in this carcass. But the Hebrew word nephesh can mean throat, breath, person, self, life, corpse, desire, mood, will, appetite, a big range. Actually leaves you wondering why soul came to be regarded as the translation of nephesh. Here in this verse it seems to mean myself, or simply me. Often the word nephesh in the Psalms just means me. But there's also the idea of appetite, or perhaps morale or zest for life. The NIV translation says, He restores my strength. Similar to the Good News Bible, maybe we could say health and strength. And he restores. The NIV 2011 changed restores to refreshes. The root verb here is just shuv. The B is repeated. This actually is B, but in some cases, usually after a vowel, it's pronounced as a V. That's why we say Yeshovev. The letter in Hebrew is Beth, which corresponds to our English B, but sometimes takes the pronunciation of V. In Psalm 19 verse 8 we have another form of this verb. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the nephesh, restoring the soul. It basically means bringing my soul, in other words me, back to a good place. Yancheni b'ma'ale tzedek limeran shmo. So here we have he leads me in ma'ale tzedek, and again there is no of in Hebrew, but the two words are joined together in a construct form, so I'll put the little of in brackets. And tzedek is righteousness, limeran, for the sake of his name. Okay, so notice the sound similarity between Maragale and Le Marin. This is all part of the Hebrew, part of the poetry of it, and also the mnemonic assistance, helping people to remember it. Again, lost in translation, but there it is in the Hebrew, the similarity of sound of those two words. Shmo, so the root word is Shem, meaning name, and the vowel has changed a little bit, shortened, because of this added on the end, his name. So, name, in the sense of character or reputation, we might say in English, his good name. So, yes, name meaning character or reputation. Okay, and righteousness, we could say right paths, right conduct, and again it's the image of walking down a path. The conduct of our life is expressed in the image of walking down a path. So here's verse 4, Psalm 23 verse 4. Gam ki elech beget salmawith lo ira ra. So gam means also, or even in this case. Ki here means if. I go, so this part here means I. And halech, normally this verb starts with an H, but that H is dropped out when we have the aleph in here, meaning I go. In valley, valley of, again no of is a construct form, Tzalmaweth. So the word Tzal by itself would mean shadow or shade, and Maweth means death. So that explains why the King James Version and other versions say the valley of the shadow of death. But most modern versions see this as an expression indicating deepest darkness. In terms of the image of the sheep and shepherd, they're going through a dark and dangerous ravine. But as applied to a person, it could mean, more literally, mean death. But there are also different ways different vowels that can be put here. The original Hebrew text had no vowels at all. These, what are called points, vowel points under here, were added by the scribes called the Masoretes much later, centuries after the original text was written and handed down. And still in Israel today, Hebrew is usually written without these vowels at all. Just the consonants are written. And as you might imagine, occasionally that leads to ambiguity, and you could supply different vowels which would clearly give the meaning of dense darkness. And this is what we find, for example, in Psalm 44 verse 20 and Psalm 107 verse 10. But so you find the difference between the NIV 1984, which said, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, compared to the NIV 2011, which said, even though I walk through the darkest valley, and with a footnote saying it could possibly be the valley of the shadow of death. I fear, so again this part means I will fear no evil or harm. This is a very common word in Hebrew. It could mean harm or trouble, even calamity. Sometimes it could mean. Ki ata gimadi shivtecha umishrantecha hema Yenachemuni. Because, before we had ki meaning if, but it also means because, and here it takes the meaning because. Ata, you, himadi, with me. This part here means the me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Again, there's no be verb, and again the King James Bible supplies it in italics, because thou art with me. And so in modern English we say because you are, you put it in here in English, are with me. Note the sudden change in person. God was referred to in the third person in verse 3, and now he's addressed in the second person, you. It's not uncommon in the Bible, but translators often smooth it out, as it can be confusing to speakers of other languages to chop and change between the pronouns like that. And I notice the CEV makes it you all the way from verse 1. So staff, and again you notice that the it's a noun and it begins with this im, which often makes verbs into nouns. Your staff, an interesting point here, in the Greek Septuagint version, the earliest translation of the Hebrew Bible, this was translated as bacteria, which of course is a Greek word meaning a rod or a staff, and this word was borrowed by modern science to describe the rod-like microbes that people discovered. They called them bacteria. Funny to find words used in modern science in these ancient translations of our psalm. Hema yenachemuni. Normally the hema, the separate form of they, isn't necessary, but here it's included just to help the parallel verse structure with ata. So ata and hema, it kind of helps the rhythmic flow of the whole line. So again we have the image of the shepherd who's protecting us, his sheep, with his shepherd's crook and his stick used for beating off the hungry wolves and so on. And they are a great comfort and consolation to us. Even when we get in trouble, we know that our good shepherd is there looking after us.